Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed. I'm Jeff Pele, and thanks for being with us on the first podcast of 2025 for us. Today, I'm joined by Doug Kreneisel, show regular, who, among other things, leads our coverage of local elections. By now, I'm sure you've heard elected officials, maybe, a history teacher or a relative, someone tell you about getting involved in politics or the scene around you. Local school boards, mayors, county council members, sheriffs, there's a lot of elected officials in this country. In fact, more than a lot. There's nearly 500,000 elected officials, and less than 1% of them are at the federal level, which is what mostly gets all the attention in the news. So that means there's a ton of local elections right now in your backyard. Tens of thousands of elections occur in the United States each and every year. This is something that we'll touch on a lot in this episode and regularly circle back to throughout 2025. We see researching and learning about the local election landscape as key to solving what we call the ballot information problem, which, if you've tuned into the show before, it's all about helping you feel as informed as possible about who it is you're actually voting for when the time comes. All that to say, Doug, welcome back to the show, and let's kick things off. How are you?
Let's rock and roll. Get into it. New year, new set of elections.
You guys covered an election like literally on New Year's Eve, right?
Yeah, there were three on New Year's Eve, and then there was an election on January 4th. So a quick, we kick things off right away. I know.
The rest for the weary. We should call those clerks and ask them how that was to administer an election on New Year's Eve and on January 4th. But hey, when the state statute or the rules dictate an election take place, you follow the rules. So
Gotta happen.
So let's just remind our listeners, when we say local, what do we mean by that? Because, really local could mean a lot of different things. We sometimes read news articles, and a local election will be the term put in a media article to describe a gubernatorial election or a state legislative election. But when we say local, what do we mean by that?
Yeah, it's broadly meaning anything below the sort of state legislative level, right? It's like you've got your governor and then you've got your state legislature, and it's anything that's at kind of like a lower level of government. I don't mean lower in like a negative way, but just kind of below that in the terms of kind of the jurisdictions that is being overseen, more close to the voter. So like county commissioners, city councilors, school board members, water district commissioners, things like that are what we're talking about when we talk about local elections. It's anything that kind of is outside of the realm of state government.
Yeah, and realistically, a local office can certainly be big. And this, for instance, mayor of Los Angeles, mayor of the largest cities, they would oversee larger budgets and more citizens than, say, the state house members of New Hampshire. But to Doug's point, state offices versus local mayors, county councils, school officials, soil commission districts, anything below the statewide level. That's what we talk about as being local. And how many of those candidates did we cover in 2024?
Yeah, so there were 37,000 elections that fall under this umbrella involving 69,000 candidates. So to put that into perspective, overall at Ballotpedia, our entire organization, we covered 97,000 candidates in 2024. So these local candidates made up like 3/4 of that total, more or less.
Yeah, generally speaking, and we've got about at least a decade of data now on this. For Congress, you usually see about 3,000 to 4,000 candidates per cycle. For state legislatures, you see about 15,000 candidates.
Mm-hmm.
So covering 69,000 candidates, and we didn't even cover the full breadth of every state, really puts into perspective, we hope for you listeners out there, just how many candidates there are for local office.
Yeah, there were like 15,000 candidates pushing that in Michigan alone in 2024.
Yeah.
So
that was 2024. Now we're to 2025. So what's going on with our local elections this year? We know that federal and state elections are taking a quieter side this year. There are federal elections scheduled regularly, except for specials. There are very few statewide elections in an odd year. That's not the case with local. There are quite a few local elections. So what do we see and what's ahead for us?
Yeah, so this is one of the items that kind of I had to kind of take some getting used to, because I was also of the mindset heading into this, oh, odd year, it's quieter, there's less stuff going on. This is the time when at Ballotpedia we're kind of getting ready for the next even year election cycle, getting our ducks in a row and things like that. Not so with local elections. Odd years are very busy. A lot of states put all of their local elections in odd years. And so this is kind of like an even busier year at the local scene than 2024 was, if you can believe that. You've got the presidential election in 2024. Everyone's like, "Oh, this is lots of stuff going on," but in reality, it's the odd years where a lot of these local elections really start appearing on the ballot.
Yeah. Are there any new states that we're going to dive into this year for the very first time that we haven't really touched much on before at the local level?
Yeah, so our main focus right now is to really nail down. We've got 26 states that we covered in 2024, and that includes 6 states that we only covered for November of 2024. So this is kind of like our first push into covering those states a little bit more comprehensively. So that's our main focus right now is on kind of what we were doing at the end of last year, making sure we've got that down pat. But we're always looking for opportunities to expand. I mentioned some of these states that really do a lot of the local election stuff in odd years. Pennsylvania, Colorado, Virginia. Those are 3 states that we aren't covering right now, but they do have a lot of local elections on the ballot in odd years. And we might kind of look into diving into those depending on kind of how the calendar all is laid out between now and the end of the year.
Yeah. So speaking of the calendar, what is one of the biggest election dates ahead of us? Again, because something that we like to talk about and remind listeners on this show. In local elections, it's not usually about the November election day. That's not usually the biggest election day of the year, in fact. So, what do we see when we look at the calendar ahead of us? What are some of the bigger election dates?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely in the camp of like, oh, big election date, that's November, right? But yeah, local elections follow all sorts of different calendars, all sorts of different schedules. This year, we're estimating around 7 to 8,000 local offices on the ballot in these states that we're covering in November, which is big. That's a large number, many thousands of offices, and then ideally multiple candidates running for those offices. But the real big one this year for us is going to be April 1st. There's something like 9 to 10,000 offices up for election. You've got a major general election in Oklahoma, in Wisconsin, Illinois, Florida. There's a lot of big group of municipal elections on April 1st in various portions of the state. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like our November election this year is April 1st.
And what can we project or expect, do you think, in terms of uncontested elections? Again, that's something we've talked a lot about on the show. That sure, there will be 10,000 offices up, but if history is any indicator, quite a few of those will be uncontested when voters show up to the polls. So, what do we know about that yet, or what can you project?
So like and it varies how states handle this, right? So it's like, some states, if you got an uncontested election, it's still going to be on the ballot. Maybe there's a spot for a write-in candidate. Who knows? But in other states, the uncontested elections are just not on the ballot at all. Oklahoma is an example of that. Well, Oklahoma has a ton of elections scheduled. Only a few of them are actually going to happen. And
Yeah, just canceled.
we're kind of seeing some contours that we haven't quite gotten to the point where that candidate information is available in bulk. But like with Illinois, they've got their general elections in April, on April 1st. And we are right now finishing up processing their primary elections. They got primary elections towards the end of February. And while there are, many thousands of offices up for election in Illinois this spring, we only have like 175 candidates running in primaries and contested primaries in Illinois in February. So if you take that sort of as an indicator, it might lead you to think that, all right, well, if that's kind of the lay of the land for the primaries, then the general election, there probably will be more things contested. There's some strange bars that have to be hit to like have a contested primary in Illinois. But I mean, from what we know, it's like 70% of local elections, 70% of elections overall, and then local elections are obviously most elections that happen overall are uncontested. So there's not really a choice to be made when it comes time to vote. And you know, we always talk about the scheduling of elections, turnout, right? In terms of odd years or off cycle elections, you've probably heard a lot of different terms for it. And that's what we're in right now, right? It's a period where most voters aren't really expecting an election, a big election to be on the horizon. Most voters think that that kind of happens in November because that's kind of what we've been primed to expect and primed to understand. So then when an election pops up, in the middle of February, unless you're kind of keyed in and paying attention to that stuff, it can sometimes sneak up on you. I've had elections sneak up on me, local elections that happen in like June that just kind of apparently come out of nowhere. That's not true. That's not how it happens, but that's how it feels a lot of the time.
Well, that's what we're here for. We're here to help in that respect. So,
Hmm.
what are you excited to learn about this year with our coverage? So, to some degree, you're not wrong that odd years are opportunities to prepare for an even year. Similar things can happen in the local elections area. So, what are you most excited about? What do you think is going to be interesting to learn in the states that we're tackling?
I'm really excited to dig into those states that we added at the tail end of 2024. We added 6 states that we looked out ahead of us, and we're like, I think we got capacity to do this. And so we covered elections in Florida, Iowa, Illinois, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas. Already mentioned Illinois a few times. We're kind of diving into that. But overall, I'm just excited to see like what is the rest of the year like for these states and to learn more about kind of the different data that's available, whether it's only available for certain elections and not other elections. This is all stuff that we're going to learn with these 6 states that will serve us well in this year, will serve us well in the next year. And then another item that I'm really looking forward to is we're trying to find new ways to reach out to these candidates once we know about them. Once we know about these elections, we like to try to kind of get in touch with the candidates specifically to ask them to fill out the candidate connection survey. And we've got a bunch of different ideas about how we might be able to increase that level of communication because, once these candidates fill out that survey, it's just a great way for voters to get to know them better. And it's a great way for their profiles to be that much more useful and helpful, not just kind of a name and an office, but actually, why is this person running for office? What are their goals? What's driving them in their desire to kind of be city council ward 3 member in the upcoming May election or whenever it's happening.
Yeah. The hope isn't any contested race, that we've got those surveys or other data points to make it easier for voters to make an informed decision, to understand when they're going to the polls what it is that they're actually seeing on the ballot. We've all been there. We've all showed up to the polls, and you see some names, and you go, I don't know what this is. I don't know what they stand for.
Mosquito abatement district. What is?
And man, I wish I knew more information about how to choose between these candidates in front of me. And we hopefully can help with that. So, what was your favorite thing from last year? Then let's just wrap up with that because it still feels kind of like 2024 is upon us. So, just put some closure on the year. What was your favorite part of the year last year?
Well, I kind of want the whole thing to be my favorite part because it was really crazy what we did. Like it was
Yeah.
wild, kind of comprehensively covering these elections throughout the entire year. But if I had to pick just one, I might settle with Texas. Texas, the fact that we covered Texas's November elections last year is a huge accomplishment. There are like more than 250 counties or right around 250 counties in Texas, and we went to every single one of them to get their local candidate information. And we learned a lot.
Yeah, because there's no central resource there, right?
But there's a central resource that goes down to county level races. So there's a central resource that will tell you who's running for sheriff, who's running for county commission, things like this. But if you want to know who's running for the school board or in a city council election or for the river management district, you got to go to the counties themselves and get that information from them. And we did. And it was a huge accomplishment. This was kind of one of those when we first started this project off, we knew this about Texas. We knew we're like, oh wow, we're gonna have to like call 250 people and ask for sample ballots and have them maybe tell us to wait and then have to call them back, or maybe they don't get our voicemail.
Yeah, 250 different versions, different file types, whether or not they actually respond.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of persistence and patience.
Well, and at the outset, we were like, at someday in the future, we'll be able to do Texas. And that day came sooner. And now Texas is in our core sort of workflow. And they've got big elections in May upcoming. Will be their next really big election date that we'll be taking a look at.
Or our Texas friends do like to say things like everything's bigger in Texas. So some version of that here.
And, in terms of the number of counties and who you have to call to find out who's running for office, that is certainly true.
Well, it's going to be a very exciting year. We'll have you back on the show soon to talk about how our local elections coverage is going. Thanks so much for your time, Tug.
Awesome. Sounds good. We'll see you then.
And for our listeners, you can learn more about our election coverage at the link in our show notes. We'll be back next week with another episode. Make sure you subscribe to On the Ballot wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Jeff Pelley, and thanks for listening.